An executive can make a fortune during the good years. He can collect bonuses. He can accumulate prestige. He can appear at conferences. He can sell a narrative of intelligence, prudence, and vision. And when the system collapses, he can walk away without returning anything. That is the problem. Not because he necessarily broke a law. Not because everything is corruption. Not because the world is full of villains. The problem is colder, more technical, more dangerous. The system was designed for him to win if things went well, and for you to pay if things went badly. Taleb gave this structure a name: skin in the game. But in this video, we are not going to treat it as philosophy. We are going to treat it as an incentive audit. Because the biggest risk in your company is not always the market. Sometimes it is your own decision makers operating without a personal safety net. When someone can capture the upside of a decision and transfer the downside to the team, the customer, the shareholder, or the system, the company becomes fragile by design. And it produces bad decisions systematically. Not accidentally, systematically. Because if being wrong is free, being wrong becomes rational. If the reward is private and the damage belongs to someone else, the system does not need bad people to fail. It only needs incentives distributed well enough to produce disaster. That is the thesis of this video. A company becomes fragile when the person who decides wins if they are right, but someone else pays if they are wrong. This is not a summary of skin in the game. We are not walking through chapters. We are not making an abstract defense of Taleb. And we are not turning this into a moral sermon. This video is an audit, an incentive audit. In the next few minutes, you will install 3 systems. First, detect who wins without losing. You will look at any org chart, contract, or project and ask who captures the upside and who carries the downside. Second, redesign incentives with consequences. Because aligning incentives is not handing out shares, bonuses, or commissions. Everyone already does that. Aligning incentives means designing the downside. Third, do not accept expertise without exposure, because a recommendation from someone who gets paid even if you lose is not judgment. It is narrative with an invoice. 3 playbooks, 4 cases, 0 moralizing. The promise is concrete. By the end of this video, you will be able to audit any important decision and detect, in minutes, who is playing with someone else's money. And you will have a system to close the exit door. First, clean up the concept. Skin in the game does not mean commitment. It does not mean ownership written in a presentation. It does not mean signing a document. It does not mean someone saying, "I take responsibility." Skin in the game means not being able to escape the damage you cause. That is the operational definition. Not being able to escape the damage you cause. Without personal exposure, the decision maker optimizes something else. They optimize the narrative. They optimize looking good in the committee. They optimize winning the debate. They optimize appearing intelligent. They optimize hitting the quarter. But they do not necessarily optimize the survival of the system, because reality only filters incompetence when being wrong is expensive. If error has no personal cost, the system accumulates errors. It hides them, it normalizes them, it packages them as strategy, until they explode. And here is the difference with the other books on the channel. Anti-Fragile teaches you how to design exposure to chaos. Skin in the Game teaches you who must carry that exposure. Thinking in systems shows you invisible structures. This book shows you when those structures allow someone to decide without paying. Good strategy/bad strategy teaches you how to design the plan. This video demands that the person drawing the plan be the first to bleed if the plan fails. This is not a book about strategy. It is a book about who answers. Playbook 1. Detect who wins without losing. Every org chart has a hidden map, not the map of titles, not the map of reporting lines. The real map is this. Who captures the upside of each decision and who carries the downside? When those 2 names do not match, you have transferred risk. And transferred risk always gets collected, just later, and with interest. The problem is that this asymmetry is invisible during good times. KP is go up. Bonuses get paid. The presentation looks clean. The committee approves. Everyone celebrates. But the bill arrives years later, when the original decision maker has already cashed out, already left, or already turned the mistake into an elegant line of executive experience. That is why you do not detect transferred risk by looking at recent results. You detect it by looking at the incentive structure. Wells Fargo is a brutal case. The pressure around cross-selling metrics pushed thousands of employees toward behaviors that ended up damaging customers, reputation, and trust. On the surface, the system was saying one thing: commercial growth. But underneath, it was saying something else: hit the metric or pay the employment cost. The upside of the metric was concentrated at the top. The immediate downside fell below. And when the scandal exploded, the cost was distributed across employees, customers, shareholders, and the institution. That is the pattern. It is not enough to ask what metric is being optimized. You have to ask who gets paid if the metric goes up, and who pays if that metric becomes toxic. The tool is called the asymmetry audit. 3 questions for every relevant decision. First, if this goes well, who gets paid? Not the team, not the company. Name and surname. Second, if this seriously fails 3 years from now, who loses something that hurts? Not abstract reputation, not discomfort, something real: money, career, power, capital, access. Third, is the person from question 1 the same person as the person from question 2? If they are not the same person, you have just found transferred risk. And if no one can answer the second question, you have found something worse: theatrical accountability. Theatrical accountability is when there are cosmetic owners, but no real consequences. Committees that dilute responsibility. Postmortems that generate lessons, but do not return a dollar. Phrases like, "We take responsibility," without anyone losing a role, a bonus, or a future option. That is not responsibility. It is corporate dramaturgy. The common mistake is confusing exposure with emotion. "My reputation is on the line" is not skin in the game if the person can move to another company with their CV intact. Real exposure is economic, contractual, or career-based, something you cannot narrate your way out of. Practical action. Take your 5 biggest decisions from the last 12 months. Create 2 columns. Who captured the upside? Who would have carried the downside? Every row where the names do not match is a time bomb. Playbook 2. Redesign incentives with consequences. Aligning incentives is not distributing upside, shares, bonuses, commissions. Almost everyone already does that, and often it fixes nothing, because the real design is in the downside. A bonus without a real clawback can become a free option. If I am right, I win. If I am wrong, I return nothing, and a free option is always exercised, rationally, with someone else's money. You do not need bad people to break a company. You need free options distributed well enough. Boeing 737 MAX can be read through many lenses. In thinking in systems, it works for talking about structure, information, and patches. Here, the angle is different. Here, the question is, who made decisions under cost, schedule, and competitive pressure, and who ended up paying the final cost when those decisions failed? We are not going to explain MCAS in detail. That is not the point. The point is asymmetry. If the worst personal scenario for the decision maker is walking away with a multi-million-dollar package, while the worst scenario for the customer is death, the system does not have a real break. It has break theater. When a decision can affect someone else's ruin barrier, the decision maker needs proportional exposure. Not symbolic, real. Because survival comes before performance. It does not matter how many times you win if one loss takes you out of the game. The redesign has 5 mechanisms, from softest to hardest. 1. Real clawbacks. Bonuses that can be recovered if the decision generates losses in a future window. It is not enough to pay for the quarter. You have to watch delayed damage. 2. Mandatory co-investment. The person proposing an initiative invests part of their bonus, capital, or reputational wealth in it. Do not tell me what you think. Tell me what is in your portfolio. 3. Reputation with memory. An internal decision record with name, prediction, and outcome. Reputation only disciplines if it is written down. If no one remembers who recommended what, reputation does not exist. 4. Veto power for the person who carries the risk. The person operating the system, receiving the complaint, absorbing the damage, or solving the fire needs veto power over decisions they will be forced to pay for. Not to block everything, but to reveal risk the executive room does not feel. 5. Reversibility filter. Reversible decisions, speed and autonomy. Irreversible decisions, mandatory personal exposure. Do not treat a decision that can kill the company as if it were an A/B test. The common mistake is implementing accountability with bureaucracy. More committees, more signatures, more RACI matrices, more documents. That can dilute responsibility instead of concentrating it. The right direction is the opposite. One name per decision, one verifiable exposure, one written downside. Practical action. Choose the next major project you approve. Before signing, write into the contract or internal agreement what the proposer returns if it fails, when it gets measured, and who has veto power. If the proposer resists that paragraph, they have just revealed their true estimate of the risk. Playbook 3. Do not accept expertise without exposure. Authority and responsibility are different things. An expert with no exposure to the outcome is not selling judgment. They are selling narrative with an invoice. The rule is simple. Never accept a recommendation from someone who pays no penalty if that recommendation becomes disastrous. This applies to consultants, but not only to consultants. It applies to internal committees, board advisors, financial models whose author does not answer for the output, external experts, gurus, agencies, even internal leaders who recommend changes and then disappear before living with the consequences. Advice without risk has a structural bias. It tends to be additive. More initiatives, more complexity, more phases, more transformation, more implementation. Because that justifies the invoice, and it tends to be bold with your money because the advisor is not at the table when the bill arrives. McKinsey and Purdue Pharma serve as a hard case. Consultants designing commercial strategies to increase opioid sales. Fees collected regardless of the social and legal outcome. Then came settlements, claims, payments, and reputational damage. But the editorial reading must not be, "Consultants are bad." That would be a cheap error. The problem is not the profession. The problem is any source of recommendations without downside. Any system where someone gets paid to propose and someone else pays to live the result. That is where the asymmetry is. The filter has 4 tests before accepting a recommendation. 1. The portfolio test. What does this person have invested in the outcome? What they say is noise. What they risk is signal. 2. The penalty test. What concretely happens to them if this fails? If the answer is nothing or their reputation, discount the advice accordingly. 3. The SCAR test. Has this person operated and lost in this domain? Or have they only explained the domain from the outside? Prioritize the person who survived a real crisis over the person who never broke anything because they never risked anything. 4. The contract test. Are they willing to tie fees, bonuses, or internal prestige to long-term results? Not everything has to be success fee, but some part of the upside must be tied to the health of the result. The answer to that question is worth more than the entire proposal. The common mistake is using the expert's brand as a personal shield. Nobody ever got fired for hiring the big firm. That is not buying judgment. It is buying reputational insurance for the person hiring them, meaning the person hiring them is making their own Bob Rubin trade. If it works, they say they had vision. If it fails, they say they hired the best. Practical action. In the next external or internal proposal you receive, add 1 question before deciding. What part of your compensation are you willing to tie to this working 24 months from now? The reaction to that question is the cheapest and densest data you will get. Let's synthesize. 3 playbooks, 1 audit. Question 1. Who gets paid if it goes well, and who bleeds if it goes badly? If they are not the same person, there is transferred risk. Question 2. Is the downside designed by contract or only the upside? If you only designed the reward, you designed half the system, and half a system can produce full damage. Question 3. Do the people advising you pay anything if they are wrong? If they pay nothing, their recommendation is worth less than it seems. Almost 4,000 years ago, the Code of Hammurabi solved this brutally. If a builder constructed a house, and the house collapsed and killed the owner, the builder paid with his life. I am not asking you to execute anyone. I am asking you to stop signing systems where being wrong is free. Because a company where being wrong is free is not waiting to see if it explodes. It is waiting to see when. Skin in the game is not abstract ethics. It is a technical metric of survival. If the person who decides cannot lose, the system loses for them, and it usually loses later, bigger, and with less capacity to correct. Immediate action, the 48-hour audit. Today, list your 5 biggest active decisions: projects, contracts, key hires, launches, operational changes, investments. For each one, write 2 columns. Who captures the upside? Who carries the downside? Mark every asymmetry. Tomorrow, take the most serious asymmetry and design a downside. It can be a clawback, co-investment, veto, outcome clause, decision record with name, measurement window of 3 to 5 years. 1 correction, in writing. This week, install the portfolio question in your decision process. No external or internal recommendation gets approved without answering. What do you risk if this fails? That question does not eliminate error, but it eliminates a lot of theater. And it shows you who is selling judgment and who is only selling a narrative they do not plan to live with. If you do this, the org chart changes, not in PowerPoint, in reality. Because suddenly recommendations become more sober, projects become smaller when they need to be, incentives become more honest, and experts start revealing what they truly believe, not through what they say, through what they accept to risk. If you audit your company with these 3 questions and find an asymmetry that makes you uncomfortable, write it in the comments. No names, only the structure. Who got paid if it went well? Who paid if it went badly? I will analyze the best ones in a future video. And if you want to complete the decision system under uncertainty, the next logical video is anti-fragile. How to design exposure to chaos once you already know who must carry it. Here, we do not summarize books. We turn them into playbooks. And this playbook can be summarized in 1 line. If someone makes decisions with someone else's money, make sure they can also lose something of their own. Because a company does not become fragile simply by taking risks. It becomes fragile when it allows its decision makers to take risks they do not pay for. See you in the next playbook.